Stand up. This is a private HOA park. You're being detained for trespassing. Show me your ID, now.
Officer, we live 3 blocks from here. I'm Dr. Marcus Ross. We're not committing a crime.
I didn't ask for a story, I asked for ID. Hands where I...
Officer Brock Danner had been with the Scottsdale Police Department for 5 years when he made a decision that would not only obliterate his career, but would also cost the taxpayers of Arizona $6.4 million. He was 32 years old, a man who prided himself on what he called proactive policing, a term that his supervisors used in performance reviews to describe his aggressive instincts, but which the community would soon come to know as racial profiling. It was a Tuesday afternoon, bright and unseasonably warm, the kind of day that draws people out of their air-conditioned homes to enjoy the desert sun. Brock Danner was on patrol, cruising the wide, palm-lined avenues of the Silverleaf District, a neighborhood of multi-million-dollar estates, manicured golf courses, and quiet exclusivity. He felt like the guardian of the gate, the protector of the peace for people who paid a premium for privacy. But his judgment, clouded by an arrogance that had never been checked, was about to lead him into a confrontation with a force far greater than his badge. At 12:15 p.m., Danner received a dispatch call regarding suspicious subjects trespassing in Heritage Oak Park. The subjects in question were Elena and Marcus Ross. They were not trespassing. They were not suspicious. They were in fact 2 of the most distinguished residents of the community. Dr. Marcus Ross, 56, was the chief of thoracic surgery at the finest hospital in the state, a man whose hands had saved thousands of lives. His wife, Elena Ross, 54, was a United States Magistrate Judge, a federal jurist whose signature authorized the very search warrants officers like Danner relied upon to do their jobs. They were enjoying a rare afternoon off, sitting on a high-end picnic blanket, eating artisanal cheese and drinking sparkling water. But to Officer Brock Danner, they were simply 2 black people in a park where he didn't think they belonged. What followed was a masterclass in incompetence and bias that would leave the department reeling. Before we dive into the details of this catastrophic failure of authority, where are you watching from today? If you believe that justice should be blind, but accountability should be visible, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Your support helps us tell the stories that the system tries to hide. Heritage Oak Park is a private enclave within the Silverleaf community. It isn't a public playground. It's a meticulously landscaped expanse of green reserved for the residents of the Homeowners Association. It features imported oak trees, a central fountain made of limestone, and walking paths that are swept daily. It is a place of silence and money. At noon on a Tuesday, it is usually empty, save for the occasional landscaper or nanny pushing a stroller. Elena and Marcus Ross had lived in Silverleaf for 12 years. Their home, a sprawling Mediterranean estate, was 3 blocks from the park. They had paid their HOA dues. They had every right to be there. Elena was wearing a cream-colored linen sundress and reading a biography. Marcus was in a polo shirt and shorts, checking emails on his tablet. They looked like exactly what they were, a successful middle-aged couple enjoying the fruits of their labor. However, the tranquility of their afternoon was already being dismantled by a woman watching them from behind the plantation shutters of a house across the street. Tiffany Miller was 34 years old, a mid-level marketing executive who was currently working from home, which on this day meant spying on her neighbors. Tiffany had moved to the neighborhood 6 months prior. She didn't know the Rosses. She didn't know the history of the community. What she knew was that she was protective of her property values, and when she looked out her window and saw a black couple setting up a picnic on the immaculate grass, her mind immediately went to a dark, biased place. She didn't see a federal judge and a surgeon. She saw outsiders. She saw a threat. She watched them for 10 minutes, her anxiety spiraling into indignation. They were eating food. They were relaxing. In Tiffany's mind, they were too comfortable. They must be scouting the neighborhood. They must be waiting for homeowners to leave so they could break in. It was a leap of logic so profound it could only be fueled by deep-seated prejudice, but to Tiffany it felt like vigilance. She picked up her phone and dialed the non-emergency line, but her voice carried the frantic energy of a 911 call. "Yes, I need an officer at Heritage Oak Park immediately," she said, peering through the slats of her blinds. "There are 2 individuals loitering in the private park. They don't look like they live here. They're just sitting on the grass watching the houses. I think they're casing the neighborhood." The dispatcher asked the standard questions. Were they armed? No. Were they threatening anyone? No. What were they doing? "They're eating," Tiffany said, as if the act of consuming lunch was a prelude to a felony. "But they don't belong here. We've had packages stolen recently, and I'm just very uncomfortable." The call was logged. The description was given: a black male and female middle-aged sitting on the north lawn. Officer Brock Danner, patrolling 2 miles away, took the call. "I'm en route," he said. He didn't hear people eating lunch. He heard suspects casing houses. He heard outsiders. And his mind, much like Tiffany Miller's, began to write the report before he even turned his steering wheel. Officer Danner had a reputation in the precinct, though not the one he thought he had. He viewed himself as a hard charger, a policeman's policeman. His colleagues viewed him as a liability waiting to happen. In his 5 years, Danner had accumulated 9 citizen complaints. Most were for rudeness or unprofessional conduct. 2 were for bias-based policing. Both had been dismissed by Internal Affairs as unfounded due to a lack of video evidence or independent witnesses. This lack of accountability had emboldened him. He believed he had a 6th sense for crime, a gut instinct that was never wrong. He didn't know that his gut was actually just a collection of stereotypes wrapped in a badge. As he drove toward Heritage Oak Park, he visualized the encounter. He would roll up hard. He would dominate the scene. He would identify these trespassers, run them for warrants, and escort them out of his district. He pulled his cruiser up to the curb of the park at 12:23 p.m., mounting the sidewalk slightly with his front tire, a tactic designed to intimidate. He stepped out of the vehicle, adjusting his utility belt, his sunglasses hiding his eyes, his hand resting near his holster. He walked across the grass with a long, aggressive stride, heading straight for the couple on the blanket. Elena Ross looked up from her book as the shadow of the officer fell over them. She squinted against the sun, expecting perhaps a polite wave or a generic "good afternoon." Instead, she saw Officer Danner standing 6 feet away, legs spread in a tactical stance looming over them. "What are you folks doing here?" Danner asked. It wasn't a greeting. It was an accusation. His voice was loud, cutting through the quiet chirping of the birds. Marcus Ross placed his tablet down on the blanket and removed his reading glasses. He was a man of immense patience, a surgeon who spent hours performing delicate operations where a single millimeter of error could mean death. He knew how to remain calm under pressure. "Good afternoon, officer," Marcus said, his voice deep and steady. "We're having lunch. Is there a problem?" Danner didn't like the tone. It was too calm. It was too educated. It didn't fit the script he had written in his head. "The problem is this is a private park for residents only," Danner snapped. "I've got calls about suspicious people loitering. I need to see some ID to prove you live in this HOA. Otherwise, you're trespassing." Elena closed her book slowly. She had spent 25 years in the legal system. She had started as a public defender, moved to the U.S. Attorney's Office, and now sat on the federal bench. She knew the law better than Danner knew the back of his own hand. She also knew that in the state of Arizona, unless an officer has reasonable suspicion that a crime has been, is being, or is about to be committed, a citizen is not required to provide identification. Eating lunch in a park was not a crime. "Officer," Elena said, her voice cool and authoritative, "we are residents. We live on Palo Verde Drive, 3 blocks from here. We are simply enjoying our property. We are not required to show you identification as we are not engaged in any criminal activity." Danner's jaw tightened. This was the trigger. He hated being quoted the law. He hated jailhouse lawyers who thought they knew their rights. "I don't care where you say you live," Danner said, stepping closer, invading their personal space. "I have a complaint of trespassing. That gives me reasonable suspicion to identify you. Now let's see the ID or we're going to have a different conversation." Marcus reached out and touched Elena's arm gently, a signal to let him handle it. He didn't want this to escalate. He knew the dangers young, aggressive officers pose to black men regardless of their tax bracket. "Officer, my name is Dr. Marcus Ross. This is my wife, Elena. We have lived here for 12 years. If you check your computer, you will see a registered alarm permit for the Ross residence on Palo Verde Drive. We are not trespassers. We are your neighbors." It was a reasonable offer. A competent officer would have walked back to his car, checked the name, verified the address, and apologized. But Danner wasn't listening to verify. He was listening to detect deceit. He didn't believe a black man in shorts was a doctor living in a $3 million home. He thought it was a cover story. "I'm not playing games with you," Danner said, his voice rising. "Stand up, both of you. Put your hands where I can see them." The dynamic in the park shifted instantly. It went from a conversation to a detention. Elena stood up, her movements graceful but rigid with anger. Marcus stood beside her, his hands raised slightly to show they were empty. "This is a mistake, officer," Elena said, her eyes locking onto Danner's sunglasses. "A very expensive mistake. I am advising you right now that you do not have probable cause for this detention. You are violating our Fourth Amendment rights against unreasonable seizure. I am asking you to call your supervisor immediately." Danner laughed. It was a short, sharp bark of a laugh. "You want a supervisor? You can talk to one at the station. You're detained for trespassing and failure to identify." He reached for his handcuffs. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs, not from fear, but from a profound burning fury. "Officer," she said, dropping the bomb she had hoped she wouldn't have to use. "I am a United States Magistrate Judge. My credentials are in my tote bag. If you touch me, if you put those handcuffs on me without cause, you are arresting a federal judicial officer. Do you understand what that means?" Danner paused for a fraction of a second. A smarter man would have paused longer. A smarter man would have asked to see the credentials. But Danner was deep in the tunnel vision of his own bias. He looked at Elena, a black woman in a sundress, and he simply could not reconcile her appearance with the authority she claimed. "Yeah, and I'm the police commissioner," Danner sneered. "I've heard it all before. Fake badges, fake titles. You people always have a story." The phrase, "you people," hung in the air, heavy and toxic. Elena went silent. There was nothing left to say. She knew that any further words would be twisted into resisting. She shifted her focus to witnessing. She memorized his nameplate, B. Danner. She memorized the time. She memorized the sneer on his face. "Turn around," Danner commanded. He grabbed Marcus's wrist first. He twisted the doctor's arm behind his back with unnecessary force, leveraging the shoulder joint. Marcus winced but remained silent, staring straight ahead. "Marcus Ross, you're under arrest," Danner announced. He ratcheted the cuffs too tight. Then he turned to Elena. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her bicep. He spun her around. "You too, Judge," he mocked. He cuffed her hands behind her back. The metal bit into her wrists. The click of the handcuffs echoed in the quiet park. By now, a few other neighbors had come out. A man walking a golden retriever stopped on the sidewalk, phone raised, recording. A gardener paused his leaf blower to watch. They saw two impeccably dressed middle-aged neighbors being treated like violent felons by a young officer who looked like he was hunting sport. "You are making a grave error," Marcus said quietly as Danner shoved him toward the patrol car. "I am the chief of surgery at St. Joseph's. I have patients waiting." Danner ignored him. He opened the back door of the cruiser and pushed Marcus inside. He then grabbed Elena by the elbow and marched her to the other side. As he pushed her head down to get her into the vehicle, Elena looked him dead in the eye. "Officer Danner," she said, her voice calm and terrifyingly final. "My badge number is USMJ 402. Remember that when you are explaining this to the FBI." Danner slammed the door in her face. He walked around to the driver's seat, adrenaline pumping, feeling the rush of a good bust. He sat down, radioed dispatch. 1 adult male, 1 adult female in custody, trespassing, uncooperative, en route to District 4. He put the car in drive and pulled away, leaving the picnic blanket, the expensive cheese, and the open book lying on the grass as evidence of the crime that never happened. The drive to the District 4 station took 20 minutes. It was a silent ride. In the back seat, Elena and Marcus leaned against each other as best they could in the cramped plastic cage. They didn't speak. They didn't have to. They had been married for 30 years. They communicated in looks and breaths. Elena was already drafting the federal complaint in her mind. She was organizing the sequence of events, the lack of probable cause, the excessive force, the failure to investigate. She wasn't just a victim anymore. She was a judge, building a case. Danner in the front seat hummed along to the radio, oblivious to the fact that the 2 people in his back seat had the power to dismantle his entire existence. When they arrived at the precinct, Danner pulled into the sally port. He hauled them out of the car, parading them through the back entrance toward the booking desk. The station was busy. Officers were typing reports, phones were ringing. Danner walked his callers up to the high desk where the watch commander sat. Sergeant Thomas Miller, no relation to the caller, was 58 years old, a veteran of the force with 30 years on the job. He was tired, cynical, but fair. He looked up over his reading glasses as Danner approached. "What do you got, Danner?" Miller asked, rubbing his temples. "Trespassing Sarge," Danner said, puffing his chest out. "Found 'em in Heritage Oak. Refused ID. Claimed they lived there but couldn't prove it. Gave me a hard time." Miller looked at the suspects. He saw a man in a polo shirt who looked like he belonged on a golf course and a woman in a linen dress who looked familiar. Miller squinted. He leaned forward. He looked at Elena Ross. He looked at her face, her poise, the way she held her head high despite the handcuffs. Then he looked at the computer screen on his desk where a daily bulletin from the federal court was open. He looked back at Elena. His blood ran cold. He stood up slowly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Ma'am," Miller said, his voice trembling slightly. "Ma'am, are you Judge Ross?" Elena nodded once. "I am Magistrate Judge Elena Ross, United States District Court, and this is my husband, Dr. Marcus Ross." The silence that fell over the booking area was instant and absolute. It was the kind of silence that happens when a bomb has been dropped but hasn't exploded yet. Miller came around the desk so fast he nearly tripped. "Danner, give me the keys," he barked. Danner looked confused. "Sarge, they're suspects. She's claiming—" "Give me the damn keys," Miller roared, snatching the handcuff key from Danner's hand. He unlocked Elena's cuffs with shaking hands. "Judge, I am so sorry. I don't know what I apologize, Your Honor." He unlocked Marcus next. "Doctor, my apologies." Danner stood there, his mouth slightly open, the realization creeping in like a slow poison. "Sarge, she didn't have ID. She said—" Miller spun on him, his face purple with rage. "Shut up, Danner. You arrested a federal magistrate judge. Did you even look at them? Did you verify anything?" The caller said. Danner stammered. "I don't care what the caller said," Miller yelled. "You put handcuffs on a federal judge and the chief of surgery. Do you have any idea what you've just done?" Elena rubbed her wrists. There were red, angry welts where the metal had dug in. She looked at Danner not with anger but with pity. "Officer Danner," she said, her voice carrying through the silent room. I told you who I was. I told you where I lived. You chose not to believe me because of what I look like. You chose to humiliate us rather than do your job." She turned to Sergeant Miller. "I want his badge number. I want the body camera footage preserved immediately, and I want to speak to the chief of police. Now." Miller nodded vigorously. "Yes, Your Honor. Right away, Your Honor." "Danner, get in the captain's office. Don't touch anything. Don't talk to anyone. Just sit there and pray." Danner walked toward the office, his legs feeling like lead. He looked back once. The judge was already on the phone, and the doctor was examining his own wrist with a clinical eye. Danner knew in that moment that his life as a police officer was over. The fallout was swift, brutal, and public. By the time the Rosses were driven home in an unmarked command vehicle driven by a captain, the video from the neighbor had hit the internet. The visual was undeniable, a calm, elegant black couple being manhandled by a white officer in a park. The headline wrote itself, "Racist Officer Arrests Federal Judge for Eating Lunch." The Scottsdale Police Department was besieged. The chief issued a statement within 4 hours, calling the arrest an inexplicable departure from policy. But apologies were not enough. Not for this. Civil rights attorney David Thorne took the case. The lawsuit filed against the city of Scottsdale, the police department, and Brock Danner personally was a masterpiece of legal argumentation. It alleged false arrest, assault, battery, defamation, and violation of civil rights under Section 1983. But the most damaging part of the lawsuit was the discovery phase. Thorne subpoenaed Danner's entire personnel file. They found what everyone suspected: the 9 previous complaints, the pattern of stopping Black and Latino motorists for suspicious activity that resulted in no citations, the supervisors who had flagged him for aggression but sent him to a one-day seminar instead of taking him off the street. The system had protected Danner, nurtured his bias, and unleashed him on the public. It just so happened that he finally bit a victim who had the teeth to bite back. The lawsuit also named Tiffany Miller, the caller. While she couldn't be sued for a civil rights violation in the same way she was sued for defamation and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Her employer, a major pharmaceutical company, saw the news. They heard the recording of her 911 call where she equated eating while Black with casing houses. They fired her 3 days later. Tiffany Miller, who had wanted to protect her property value, ended up losing her job and becoming a pariah in the very neighborhood she tried to gatekeep. The city of Scottsdale didn't even try to fight it. The video was too damning. The victim was too powerful. The optics were a nightmare. They settled the case in mediation. The final figure was $6.4 million. It was one of the largest settlements for a single incident of wrongful arrest in the state's history. But the money was just the financial penalty. The real cost was the structural purge that followed. Brock Danner was fired. But Judge Ross wasn't satisfied with the firing. She pushed the Arizona Peace Officer Standards and Training Board to decertify him. Danner fought it, claiming he made a good faith mistake. The board didn't buy it. They revoked his certification. He would never carry a badge or a gun in the United States again. At 32, he was unemployed, branded a racist by the national media, and facing personal liability for the portion of the lawsuit the city refused to cover. He ended up moving back to his hometown in Ohio, working in a warehouse far away from the power he had abused. The lesson here isn't just about a bad apple. It's about the barrel. It's about a system that allowed Danner to operate for 5 years with unchecked bias. It's about a culture that teaches officers that their authority is absolute, and that citizens, especially Black citizens, are subjects to be controlled rather than neighbors to be served. Elena and Marcus Ross were lucky. They had the status, the knowledge, and the resources to fight back. They had the credentials to prove Danner wrong. But what about the people who don't? What about the young man who isn't a doctor, the woman who isn't a judge, who fights for them when an officer like Danner decides they don't belong. That afternoon in the park was supposed to be a quiet lunch. Instead, it became a $6.4 million expose of the rot at the heart of policing. As the sun sets on Heritage Oak Park today, the Rosses still go there. They still sit on the grass. But now when police cruisers drive by, they slow down. The officers wave respectfully. They know who lives there. But it shouldn't take a federal judgeship to earn that wave. It shouldn't take a lawsuit to earn basic human dignity. We have to ask ourselves how many Brock Danners are still out there patrolling your streets waiting for a call from a Tiffany Miller. And what are we going to do to stop them before the next settlement is paid in blood instead of dollars? Do you think police departments should be required to carry personal liability insurance for officers with a history of bias complaints? Or should the taxpayers continue to foot the bill for racism? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story made you think, if it made you angry, share it. Because the only way we change the system is by shining a light on it, one story at a time. Thanks for watching and stay safe out there.